I'll create an engaging and realistic story set in the USA, based on your title, The Real Case That Became a Hit Series, and adapting the synopsis you provided. The story will be delivered in English, structured in 4 interconnected chapters of approximately 1,100 words each, following the guidelines you specified. The Real Case That Became a Hit Series at Zesaduro. Chapter 1. The autumn rain fell relentlessly over Boston's historic streets, washing away fallen leaves and creating a somber backdrop for what would become the most defining case of Detective Marcus Reed's career. It was October 1997, and the city was still reeling from economic shifts that had widened the gap between the old money of Beacon Hill and the struggling neighborhoods that surrounded it. Marcus sat at his desk, staring at the case file that had just landed in front of him. At 34, he was the youngest detective to be promoted to the homicide unit in the last decade, a fact that earned him equal measures of respect and resentment. The promotion came after he had successfully solved a series of robberies in the Back Bay area. But the shadow of a past mistake, a wrongful arrest that had cost an innocent man 6 months of his life, still haunted him. 23-year-old Catherine Whitley. Missing for 48 hours, Captain Harris said, his voice gruff from years of cigarettes and late nights. The family's making noise, and I mean loud noise. Senator Whitley has already called the commissioner twice. Marcus flipped through the preliminary report. Catherine Whitley, a recent Boston University graduate, had disappeared after attending a charity gala at the Fairmont Copley Plaza. The daughter of one of Massachusetts' most influential families, known for their generations-old shipping empire and political connections, Catherine was not just another missing person. She was a potential headline, a career maker or breaker. "Any signs of foul play?" Marcus asked, studying the photograph of the young woman with striking blue eyes and a confident smile. "Nothing concrete. Security footage shows her leaving the hotel alone at 11:43 p.m. No credit card activity since. Her car was found in the hotel parking garage. The family insists she wouldn't just take off." As Marcus drove to the Whitley estate in Chestnut Hill, the rain intensified, matching his growing unease. The mansion stood imposing against the grey sky, old money evident in its Georgian architecture and immaculate grounds. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with tension and unspoken accusations. Elizabeth Whitley, Catherine's older sister, met him in the grand foyer. Unlike the poised woman in the society page photos Marcus had reviewed, Elizabeth appeared disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. At 28, she had the composed demeanor of someone accustomed to crisis management, though the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her distress. "Detective Reed," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming personally. Ms. Whitley, I'm sorry about your sister. I'd like to see her room, if possible." Elizabeth led him upstairs, speaking in measured tones. "My parents are with our family lawyer. They're organizing a press conference for tomorrow. My father believes public pressure will expedite the search." Catherine's room was a study in contrasts. Designer clothes and vintage band posters, expensive perfumes alongside dog-eared paperbacks. Marcus noticed a journal on the nightstand, its leather cover worn from frequent handling. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward it. "The officers yesterday said it wasn't relevant," Elizabeth replied, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "They spent 15 minutes here and concluded she probably ran off with a boyfriend we don't know about." "I'm not those officers," Marcus said, carefully picking up the journal. The most recent entry was dated 3 days before Catherine's disappearance. "Meeting with Jay again tomorrow. He says he has proof. This could change everything." "Does Jay mean anything to you?" Marcus asked. Elizabeth shook her head. Catherine had a wide circle of friends, especially since she started working at the foundation. The Whitley Foundation, Marcus knew, was the family's philanthropic arm, focusing on urban renewal projects in Boston's underserved neighborhoods. Catherine had recently taken a position there, supposedly to learn the family business from the ground up. As Marcus continued his investigation, the case quickly captivated the public's imagination. By the end of the week, Catherine's disappearance dominated local news, her smiling face appearing on every channel. Senator Whitley's press conference had been a masterclass in leveraging political influence, with the governor himself pledging state resources to find the missing heiress. For Marcus, however, the media circus only complicated matters. Each lead seemed to dissolve under scrutiny, and the pressure from above intensified with every passing day. His captain had made it clear, solve this case, and his career was made. Fail, and he might as well request a transfer to traffic control. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While reviewing security footage from businesses near the hotel, Marcus noticed Catherine meeting a man in a coffee shop across the street, hours before the gala. The man's face wasn't clearly visible, but his distinctive posture and the way he anxiously checked his surroundings suggested someone who didn't want to be recognized. When Marcus showed the footage to Elizabeth, her reaction was immediate and visceral. "That's Julian Mercer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He worked for our foundation. My father fired him 3 weeks ago. Why wasn't he mentioned before?" Marcus asked, trying to keep the accusation out of his tone. "Because my father said he wasn't relevant," Elizabeth replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Julian was developing a report on our housing projects in Roxbury, something about fund misappropriation. My father called it a misunderstanding." As Marcus left the Whitley estate, the rain had finally stopped, but the cold remained, seeping into his bones as he processed this new information. The case was expanding beyond a simple disappearance, touching on corporate misconduct, family secrets, and possibly corruption. His phone rang. It was his partner, Detective Sanchez, with news that would change everything. "Reed, we found something. A witness saw Catherine Whitley getting into a car with Julian Mercer the night she disappeared. And get this, the car was registered to Coastal Development Corp." "What's Coastal Development?" Marcus asked, already dreading the answer. "A subsidiary of Whitley Enterprises. They're behind the Roxbury housing project that's been in the news." The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that was as complex as it was disturbing. As Marcus drove back to the precinct, he couldn't shake the feeling that finding Catherine Whitley might just be the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous investigation, one that could either redeem his past mistakes or bury his career forever. What he didn't know yet was that this case would eventually capture the imagination of not just Boston, but the entire nation, becoming the inspiration for one of the most acclaimed series in television history. Chapter 2. Elizabeth Whitley stood at her bedroom window, watching Detective Reed's car disappear down the long driveway. The morning sun struggled to break through lingering clouds, casting a weak light over the estate's manicured grounds. In the 7 days since Catherine's disappearance, Elizabeth had felt herself transforming, shedding the compliant daughter persona she had cultivated for years. Her phone vibrated with yet another message from her father's assistant, reminding her about the family's appearance on a national morning show scheduled for tomorrow. The Whitleys were performing Grief with Precision, a public relations strategy orchestrated by the family's crisis management team. Only Elizabeth seemed to notice, or care, that actual detective work was taking a back seat to press conferences and televised pleas. Making a decision, she grabbed her car keys and slipped out through the service entrance, avoiding the reporters camped at the main gate. 20 minutes later, she parked outside a modest apartment building in Cambridge, where Julian Mercer had lived before his sudden disappearance. The building manager, swayed by a combination of Elizabeth's family name and a generous cash donation, let her into Julian's apartment. The space was spartanly furnished but meticulously organized. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on urban planning and economic justice, hardly the reading material of someone plotting an abduction. On Julian's desk, Elizabeth found a folder labeled Whitley Foundation Roxbury Project. Inside were financial records, photographs of substandard construction, and copies of emails between her father and various contractors, discussing ways to optimize costs while maintaining the appearance of compliance. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she photographed the documents with her phone. She had suspected her father's business ethics were flexible, but this suggested systematic fraud, using the foundation's charitable status as cover for cutting corners on low-income housing projects. If Catherine had discovered this, if she had threatened to expose it. A noise in the hallway startled her. Elizabeth quickly replaced the folder and slipped out, nearly colliding with a man entering the neighboring apartment. "Sorry," she muttered, keeping her head down. "Wait, you're Elizabeth Whitley, aren't you?" the man asked. "Julian's friend. He showed me your picture once." Elizabeth hesitated, assessing the man, mid-30s, dressed in the casual uniform of a tech worker, with kind eyes that held no obvious threat. "I'm David Chen. I live next door," he continued. "Is there any news about Julian or your sister? It's all over the news, but they never say anything real." "No official news," Elizabeth replied carefully. "Did you know Julian well? Well enough to know he was terrified the last time I saw him, said he was onto something big, something dangerous. I thought he was being dramatic, but then he disappeared, and now your sister—" David invited her in, and over coffee he shared what he knew. Julian had been working at the Whitley Foundation for nearly 2 years, passionate about affordable housing initiatives. Recently, though, he had become increasingly paranoid, working late into the night and covering his windows with blankets. "The night before he disappeared, he gave me this," David said, retrieving a small flash drive from a drawer. "Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to a reporter he trusted, but with your sister missing too, I don't know what to do." Elizabeth stared at the small device, her heart racing. "May I see what's on it?" The drive contained a detailed report documenting how the Whitley Foundation had systematically diverted funds meant for quality materials and safety features in their Roxbury housing project. More damning were recorded conversations between Elizabeth's father and city officials, suggesting bribes had secured approvals for substandard work. The final document was a letter to Catherine, dated the day before her disappearance, outlining Julian's findings and expressing his fear for their safety. "She knew," Elizabeth whispered. "Catherine knew, and she was going to do something about it." Back in her car, Elizabeth called Detective Reed, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. "I need to see you. Not at the station, not at my house, somewhere private. I have information about Catherine and Julian Mercer." And they met at the Boston Public Garden, sitting on a bench overlooking the pond. The late afternoon light cast long shadows as Elizabeth handed Reed the flash drive. "My sister wasn't abducted by some random predator," she said. "She disappeared because she was about to expose my father's corruption. Julian Mercer was helping her." Reed's expression remained professional, but his eyes reflected the gravity of her accusation. "These are serious allegations against a powerful man, Ms. Whitley. Your father has friends in every level of government, including my department." "I know what I'm doing," Elizabeth replied, though in truth she felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice. "Catherine would have done the same for me." As Reed reviewed the documents on his laptop, his face grew increasingly grim. "This changes the nature of the investigation," he said finally. "But without Catherine or Mercer, we have no witnesses, just documents that could be challenged as fabricated." "Then we need to find them," Elizabeth said simply. "We?" Reed raised an eyebrow. "This isn't a television show, Ms. Whitley. You're a civilian, and if your suspicions are correct, you could be in danger too." "I'm already involved," Elizabeth countered. "And I have access my sister's life. Her contacts, her private communications, things she wouldn't have shared with the police or even put in her journal. I can go places and talk to people who would clam up the moment they saw your badge." Reed seemed to weigh his options, his professional training battling with the practical reality of the situation. "I can't officially sanction your involvement," he said finally, "but I can't stop you from conducting your own inquiries. Just keep me informed. And for God's sake, be careful." As they parted ways, Reed added, Your father's scheduled to testify before the State Committee on Urban Development tomorrow. It might be worth watching." Elizabeth nodded, already formulating a plan. The sensation of taking action, of finally doing something beyond sitting in press conferences and fielding sympathy calls, filled her with a strange, nervous energy. That night, as her parents prepared their statements for the next day's committee hearing, Elizabeth slipped into her father's study. His computer was password protected, but she knew his habits. The password was always some variation of his boat's name, and the year he acquired it. Within minutes she was scrolling through his emails, her stomach knotting with each new revelation. The correspondence confirmed everything in Julian's report, and worse. Her father had been aware of structural issues in the Roxbury buildings for months. An engineering report had warned of potential catastrophic failure, yet construction had continued. More disturbing were emails to a contact identified only as DM, discussing how to handle the Julian situation, and later references to Catherine becoming a liability to the family legacy. Elizabeth's hand shook as she forwarded the most incriminating emails to herself. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the study door open until her father's voice cut through the silence. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Senator Richard Whitley asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Elizabeth turned slowly, facing the man she had respected and feared in equal measure her entire life. In that moment, looking into his cold, calculating eyes, she knew with absolute certainty that he was capable of anything, even harming his own daughter, to protect his empire. "I'm finding out what happened to Catherine," she answered, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "The real story, not the one you've been selling to the press." The senator's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of calculation, of measuring how much she knew and what threat she posed. "You've always had an active imagination," he said, his tone dismissive. "Catherine ran off with that idealistic fool Mercer. When she comes to her senses, she'll return, and this embarrassing episode will be forgotten." "Is that what DM was supposed to arrange?" Elizabeth asked, watching her father's face closely. "For Catherine to come to her senses?" The mention of DM hit its mark. The senator's composure slipped for just a moment, long enough for Elizabeth to see the flash of panic before he regained control. "You're upset, and you're not thinking clearly," he said, his voice softening to the tone he used for difficult constituents. "We all want Catherine home safe. Why don't you leave the investigation to the professionals?" Elizabeth stood, gathering her courage. "That's exactly what I'm doing," she said, moving toward the door. "The real professionals, not the ones on your payroll." As she walked away, her father called after her, "Elizabeth, don't make the same mistake your sister did. Family loyalty should mean something." She paused at the door. "It does mean something, Father. That's why I'm doing this." In her room, Elizabeth's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet tomorrow, 10 a.m., coffee shop on Commonwealth Ave. Might have info on C and J come alone. Amy." Amy, Catherine's closest friend from college, who had been conspicuously absent from the search efforts. Elizabeth had tried to reach her multiple times without success. Now, it seemed, Amy was ready to talk, and Elizabeth was ready to listen, regardless of where the truth might lead. Chapter 3. Detective Marcus Reed hunched over his desk, surrounded by the controlled chaos of the precinct's homicide unit. The Whitley case files had multiplied, spilling from his desk onto a separate table he'd commandeered. Witness statements, financial records, surveillance footage. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, yet the most crucial pieces remained elusive. "You look like hell," Detective Sanchez commented, placing a coffee cup on the only clear corner of Reed's desk. "When was the last time you slept?" "Sleep is overrated," Reed muttered, grateful for the caffeine. "I've got Senator Whitley's chief of staff coming in for questioning in 30 minutes. Guy named Daniel Morrow." "DM," Sanchez said, raising an eyebrow. "The one from the emails." Reed nodded, taking a careful sip of the scalding coffee. "The captain's not happy about it. Got a call from the commissioner this morning, reminding me about procedural propriety when dealing with the senator's staff. Translation: "Don't rock the boat," Sanchez said with a grimace. Something like that. Reed glanced at his watch. "Any word from our friends at the Roxbury construction site?" "Nothing concrete," Sanchez replied, lowering his voice. "But the foreman I talked to was nervous, said there've been inspectors crawling all over the place since yesterday, and not the usual ones who sign off on everything. These guys were actually checking things." Reed's phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth Whitley. "Meeting Amy Chen at Cafe Nero on Commonwealth in 20 minutes. Catherine's college roommate. Has information." He texted back quickly, "Be careful. Recording app I showed you. Will check in after my 10 a.m. The relationship with Elizabeth had evolved into an uneasy alliance over the past week. Officially, she was a family liaison. Unofficially, she had become his eyes and ears in circles where his badge would only close doors. Reed knew it was unorthodox at best, potentially career-ending at worst, but conventional methods weren't working. The Whitley influence reached too far, and time was running out for Catherine if she was still alive. Daniel Morrow arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Reed's monthly salary. At 45, Morrow had the polished appearance of someone who had spent decades in the corridors of power, his silver-streaked hair and confident posture projecting authority. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Morrow," Reed began, leading him to an interview room. "I appreciate your voluntary cooperation." "Senator Whitley wants nothing more than to find his daughter," Morrow replied smoothly. "We're all deeply concerned about Catherine's safety." The interview room was deliberately chosen, not the harsh, intimidating space used for suspects, but a more comfortable room typically reserved for witnesses. Reed needed Morrow talking, not lawyering up. "You've worked for Senator Whitley for how long?" Reed asked, keeping his tone conversational. "Nearly 15 years. I joined his team during his first Senate campaign, and in that time you've become his right hand, handling sensitive matters, communications that require discretion." Morrow's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "I oversee the senator's professional communications, yes. In a position like his, discretion is essential." Reed placed a folder on the table between them. "We've been reviewing communications related to the Roxbury housing project. Your name, or rather your initials, appear in several concerning exchanges. I'm involved in many of the senator's projects," Morrow replied, his voice still steady. "Though I'm not sure what this has to do with finding Catherine." "That's what I'm trying to determine," Reed said, opening the folder to reveal printouts of the emails Elizabeth had provided. "These messages discuss handling the Julian situation and Catherine becoming a liability. Care to elaborate?" For the first time, Morrow's composure faltered. He glanced at the printouts, then back at Reed, calculation evident in his expression. "Those appear to be private communications taken out of context," he said finally. "Julian Mercer was terminated for attempting to extort the Foundation. He threatened to fabricate evidence of wrongdoing if he wasn't given a substantial payment. As for Catherine, her impulsive decision to meet with Mercer after his termination was creating public relations issues for the Foundation. That's all liability referred to. And yet, both Catherine and Mercer disappeared within 24 hours of each other," Reed countered. "Quite a coincidence. Detective, I understand you're under pressure to solve this case, but trying to manufacture a conspiracy involving the senator is not going to help find Catherine." Morrow's tone had hardened. "Perhaps your resources would be better spent investigating Mercer's background. He had financial problems, a history of radical activism, and an unhealthy obsession with Catherine." Reed studied Morrow's face, recognizing the pivot for what it was. A practiced deflection, redirecting suspicion away from the Whitley organization and onto the convenient scapegoat. "We're exploring all angles," Reed said neutrally, "including why Catherine was meeting with Mercer the day she disappeared, and what documents she might have had with her." Something flickered in Morrow's eyes. Concern, perhaps, or calculation. If you're implying that Catherine was involved in some kind of corporate espionage against her own family's foundation, that's absurd. She was young, idealistic, and easily influenced by Mercer's rhetoric. If anything, she was a victim of his manipulation. The interview continued for another 40 minutes, with Morrow parrying each question with practiced ease. Reed knew he wasn't going to get a confession. That wasn't the goal. He was watching for reactions, for the subtle tells that might indicate which questions hit closer to home. And several times, particularly when Reed mentioned specific details from the Roxbury Project documents, Morrow's carefully maintained facade had cracked, just slightly. As Morrow was leaving, Reed offered one final question. Do you know anyone who might want to harm Catherine or Julian Mercer? Morrow paused at the door. Detective, in politics and business, people make enemies. The senator has received threats before. It comes with the territory. But harming Catherine, no one who values their freedom would dare touch a senator's daughter. The implied threat wasn't lost on Reed. After Morrow left, Sanchez entered the interview room, having watched from the observation area. That guy's slick, Sanchez commented, but he's worried. Definitely, Reed agreed. And did you notice he never actually answered the question? He deflected to threats against the senator, but never addressed Catherine or Mercer specifically. Reed's phone buzzed again. A text from Elizabeth. Amy, no show. Cafe employee says man cancelled her shift today. Amy's roommate says she packed a bag last night, said she was going away for a while. Something's wrong. Before Reed could respond, Captain Harris appeared at the door, his expression grim. Reed, we need to talk. Now. In the captain's office, Harris didn't bother with preliminaries. What the hell are you doing, bringing in the senator's chief of staff like a common suspect? Following leads, sir. Morrow's name came up in connection with Mercer and, potentially, Catherine's disappearance. From what source? Harris demanded. Because I've got the commissioner breathing down my neck and the mayor's office calling, all wanting to know why we're harassing the senator's staff instead of finding his daughter. Reed hesitated. Revealing Elizabeth as his source would compromise her position and potentially her safety. Multiple sources suggest a connection between Catherine's disappearance and irregularities at the Whitley Foundation's Roxbury project. Morrow oversees that project. Harris studied him for a long moment. You're on thin ice, Reed. The Whitley family has been through enough without us adding to their stress with unfounded accusations. With all due respect, sir, I'm trying to find Catherine Whitley. If that means asking uncomfortable questions, that's what I'll do. And if those questions cost you your badge, Harris challenged, then at least I'll know I did my job. Reed replied evenly. The captain sighed, some of his anger deflating. Look, I get it. You're a good detective and you want to follow every lead. But there are political realities here that you need to consider. The senator has friends in the governor's office, in the Justice Department. This isn't just about one missing girl anymore. It was never just about one missing girl, Reed said quietly. It's about the truth, wherever that leads. As Reed left the captain's office, his phone rang. Elizabeth's number. Her voice was tense, urgent. Marcus, I think I found something. Amy's roommate mentioned she'd been working part-time at a wellness retreat in the Berkshires, a place called Clearwater Lodge. It's owned by a subsidiary of my father's company. I checked Catherine's credit card statements again. She made a payment to Clearwater 3 days before she disappeared. You think she was planning to go there? Reed asked, already grabbing his jacket. I think she might be there now. Willingly, or not. Elizabeth's voice dropped lower. There's more. I found emails suggesting the lodge is used to manage sensitive situations for the company. People go there to recover from various crises, addiction, mental health episodes, PR disasters, or to be kept out of sight. Reed finished the thought. I'll get a warrant. That could take days, and someone might warn them. I'm driving out there now. Elizabeth, wait, Reed began, but she had already hung up. Reed slammed his fist against his desk, startling nearby officers. Elizabeth was right about the warrant. With the Whitley influence, any official request would be delayed, scrutinized, and potentially leaked. But her going alone was reckless, potentially dangerous. "Sanchez," he called across the bullpen, "I need you to cover for me for a few hours." "Where are you going?" his partner asked, concerned. "To prevent another disappearance," Reed replied grimly, heading for the door. "And maybe, just maybe, to find Catherine Whitley." The drive to the Berkshires took nearly 2 hours, with Reed pushing his unmarked car to its limits on the winding roads. Clearwater Lodge was nestled in the hills, accessible only by a private road that wound through acres of pristine forest. The main building, a sprawling stone and timber structure, projected serenity and exclusivity, a perfect place to disappear, voluntarily or otherwise. Elizabeth's car was already in the visitor parking area when Reed arrived. He approached cautiously, his hand resting near his weapon, eyes scanning the grounds for security personnel. The main entrance featured a discreet reception desk, staffed by a young woman with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Clearwater Lodge," she greeted him. "Do you have a reservation, or are you here to visit one of our guests?" "I'm looking for Elizabeth Whitley," Reed said, deciding directness was his best option. "She arrived a short while ago." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "I'm afraid we haven't had any visitors by that name today. Perhaps you have the wrong facility." Before Reed could respond, his phone vibrated with a text. "East Wing, 2nd floor, room 217. Hurry." Chapter 4. Elizabeth Whitley had never considered herself brave. Capable, yes. Resourceful, certainly. But bravery implied a willingness to face danger, and until Catherine's disappearance, Elizabeth's life had been carefully constructed to avoid precisely that. Now, standing in the eerily quiet corridor of Clearwater Lodge's East Wing, she felt a strange calm despite the thundering of her heart. She had gained access through a service entrance, using the confidence that came with her family name and a visitor badge she'd created, using the lodge's website logo. The staff, accustomed to the discreet comings and goings of wealthy clients, barely glanced at her as she moved purposefully through the building. Room 217 was at the end of the hallway, its door indistinguishable from the others, except for a small electronic keypad replacing the traditional lock. Elizabeth hesitated, then tried the combination she'd found in her father's email, Catherine's birth month and year. The lock clicked open. Inside, the room resembled an upscale hotel suite rather than a medical facility, with tasteful furnishings and large windows overlooking the forested grounds. The bathroom door was ajar, and Elizabeth could hear the sound of running water. "Catherine," she called softly, moving cautiously into the room. The bathroom door opened fully, revealing not her sister but Amy Chen, Catherine's college roommate. Amy's eyes widened in shock and something like fear. "Elizabeth, what are you doing here?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Looking for Catherine," Elizabeth replied, studying Amy's face. The young woman appeared tired but unharmed. "Is she here? Is she alive?" Amy glanced nervously toward the door. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "Amy, please. She's my sister. Whatever's happening, whatever you know, I need to find her." Amy seemed to struggle internally before making a decision. "She was here. They brought her in the night she disappeared, said she was having a nervous breakdown, needed rest and supervision. Your father arranged it all." "And Julian Mercer?" Elizabeth pressed. "I don't know about him. I just know Catherine was scared. She showed me documents, told me what she'd discovered about the Roxbury project." Amy's voice trembled. "2 days ago, they moved her. I overheard the doctor talking about a more secure facility upstate." "What doctor? What facility?" Elizabeth demanded, her calm beginning to fracture. "Dr. Harmon. He oversees all the special cases here." Amy lowered her voice further. "He has an office downstairs, keeps records of all transfers. I've seen him accessing files late at night when he thinks no one's around." Elizabeth's phone buzzed with a text from Reed, indicating he had arrived. She quickly replied with her location. "We need to find those records," Elizabeth said, already moving toward the door. "Wait," Amy called, grabbing her arm. "There's something else. Catherine gave me this before they moved her." She retrieved a small object from beneath the mattress, a simple silver locket. "She said it was insurance, that I should give it to you if anything happened to her." Elizabeth recognized the locket immediately. Their grandmother had given it to Catherine on her 16th birthday. Opening it, she found not a photograph but a tiny memory card. "What's on it?" she asked. "I don't know. She just said it would blow everything open if it got into the right hands." A noise in the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps approached, then paused outside the door. Elizabeth quickly pocketed the locket as the door swung open, revealing Detective Reed, his expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. "Elizabeth, we need to go. Now." His voice was low, urgent. "Security knows something's wrong. They're checking all the rooms." "We need to get to Dr. Harmon's office first," Elizabeth insisted. "He has records of where they took Catherine." Reed looked between the two women, clearly calculating risks against potential rewards. "Where's the office?" "First floor, east wing," Amy supplied. "End of the administrative corridor, but it's always locked." "Not a problem," Reed said grimly. "But we move fast, and if I say run, you run. Understood?" They made their way downstairs via a service stairwell, avoiding the main areas where staff might question their presence. The administrative corridor was quiet, most offices emptied for the day. Dr. Harmon's office stood at the end, its frosted glass door bearing his name and title, Medical Director. Reed examined the lock, then retrieved a small kit from his pocket. "Standard precaution for serving warrants on reluctant witnesses," he explained, working quickly with the tools. The door clicked open within seconds. Inside, the office was meticulously organized, with medical reference books lining one wall and a large desk dominating the space. Reed went straight for the computer while Elizabeth searched through the filing cabinets. "It's password protected," Reed muttered, staring at the login screen. "Try Hippocrates," Amy suggested. "I've seen him type it before." The password worked, giving them access to the system. Reed quickly navigated to the patient records, searching for Catherine's name. "Here," he said, his voice tightening. "Catherine Whitley, admitted October 18th, diagnosed with acute stress reaction and paranoid ideation. Transferred October 22nd to Lakeside Wellness Center in Burlington, Vermont." "That's yesterday," Elizabeth said, moving to look over his shoulder. "Is there anything else? Any notes about her condition, her treatment?" Reed scrolled through the file, his expression darkening. "Medication log shows they had her on heavy sedatives. And there's a notation here about psychological decompensation following exposure to disruptive influences. Signed by Dr. Harmon and countersigned by Daniel Morrow," Elizabeth finished, recognizing her father's chief of staff's electronic signature. "He was involved in all of this." A noise from the hallway interrupted them, voices approaching quickly. Reed closed the files and shut down the computer. "We need to go. Now," he insisted, guiding Elizabeth toward a side door that led to an adjacent corridor. They moved swiftly through the building, with Amy leading them toward a rear exit used by maintenance staff. As they pushed through the door into the cool evening air, Reed's phone rang. "Sanchez." "We've got a situation," his partner said without preamble. "The captain knows you went to Clearwater. He's furious, talking about administrative leave. And there's more. A body was found in the Charles River an hour ago. Male, early 30s. Preliminary ID suggests it's Julian Mercer." Elizabeth watched Reed's face change, saw the moment when the case transformed from a missing persons investigation to a potential homicide. Her own mind raced, connecting the dots between Catherine's discoveries, Julian's evidence, and now his death. "We need to get to Burlington," she said as Reed ended the call. "Tonight." "Elizabeth, this just got a lot more complicated," Reed replied, his voice strained. "If Mercer was murdered, then Catherine is in even more danger," Elizabeth finished. "And every minute we waste arguing about it puts her at greater risk." Amy stepped forward, her earlier fear replaced by determination. "I can't go with you. I need to stay here, keep my position. I might be able to get more information." It's too dangerous, Elizabeth protested. No more dangerous than what you're doing, Amy countered. Just promise you'll find her. The drive to Burlington took over 3 hours, with Reed making calls to trusted contacts in Vermont law enforcement along the way. Elizabeth sat beside him, the silver locket clutched in her hand, her mind filled with memories of Catherine, not the polished heiress from family photographs, but the sister who had taught her to swim, who had stood up for her against their father's criticism, who had encouraged her to find her own voice. She was always the brave one, Elizabeth said softly, breaking the long silence. Everyone saw her as this privileged socialite, but Catherine had more courage than anyone I know. When she discovered what was happening at Roxbury, she could have looked the other way. Most people would have. Reed glanced at her briefly. That courage seems to run in the family. No, Elizabeth shook her head. I spent my whole life playing it safe, following rules, avoiding conflict. Even when I suspected things weren't right, I convinced myself it wasn't my place to question. Yet here you are, Reed pointed out, risking everything to find your sister. Because I should have been there for her sooner, Elizabeth replied, the weight of regret evident in her voice. She tried to tell me something was wrong with the Foundation's projects weeks ago. I dismissed it as her being dramatic. Lakeside Wellness Center was smaller than Clearwater Lodge, its facility tucked away on the shores of Lake Champlain. By the time they arrived, it was past midnight. The building mostly dark except for security lighting and a few windows on the upper floor. Reed's contact, a detective with the Burlington police named Simmons, met them in a diner a mile from the facility. She arrived in plain clothes, her expression serious. I checked with the county records, Simmons said without preamble. Lakeside is owned by a shell company that traces back to Coastal Health Partners, which is a subsidiary of Whitley Enterprises, Elizabeth finished. They own dozens of healthcare facilities across New England. What about security? Reed asked. Minimal but professional. 2 guards at the entrance, electronic access throughout, cameras covering all approaches. Simmons slid a folder across the table. I pulled these from county planning. The original blueprints when the place was renovated 5 years ago. Might help you understand the layout. Us? Reed raised an eyebrow. You're not coming in. Simmons smiled grimly. Officially, I'm not even here. Unofficially, I can give you 2 hours before I report a suspicious vehicle near the facility. Use them wisely. They spent 40 minutes studying the blueprints, identifying possible entry points and likely locations for patient rooms. The facility had 20 beds total, according to the plans, with a secure wing on the 2nd floor. That's where they'd keep her, Reed said, indicating the secure area. The question is, how do we get in without alerting security? Elizabeth studied the plans carefully. There's a service entrance here for food deliveries. According to this, it should connect to a freight elevator that goes to all floors. Their approach to Lakeside was cautious, with Reed parking a quarter-mile away and then proceeding on foot through the wooded property. The service entrance was secured with a keypad lock, but Reed made quick work of it using techniques that Elizabeth suspected weren't taught at the police academy. Inside, the building was quiet, with only the hum of equipment and distant footsteps breaking the silence. They moved carefully, following the path they had memorized from the blueprints. The freight elevator brought them to the 2nd floor, where the secure wing was separated from the main corridor by another locked door. Wait here, Reed whispered, examining the electronic lock. This is more sophisticated than the others. As Reed worked on the lock, Elizabeth heard voices approaching, a male and female discussing medication schedules. She tugged Reed's sleeve in warning, and they quickly ducked into a nearby utility closet, leaving the door cracked to observe. 2 staff members in scrubs passed by, one consulting a tablet. Room 12 needs the increased dosage, the woman was saying. Doctor, Harmon called it in personally. Again, the man replied, sounding concerned. She's already on twice the standard dose. Any more and we're talking about serious side effects. Orders are orders, the woman said with a shrug. The family wants her stabilized before transfer. After they passed, Reed and Elizabeth exchanged grim looks. Room 12, Elizabeth whispered. We need to find it. The secure wing was arranged in a horseshoe pattern, with patient rooms lining both sides of a central corridor. Room 12 was at the far end, its door indistinguishable from the others, except for the small number plate beside it. Reed checked for cameras before approaching the door. It's probably locked from the inside as well, he murmured, and there might be monitoring equipment. Elizabeth felt a surge of determination. We've come this far. I'm not leaving without her. The door was indeed locked, but a staff keycard reader offered another option. Reed removed a small electronic device from his pocket, another tool that Elizabeth suspected wasn't standard issue. Sanchez's brother works in cybersecurity, he explained, attaching the device to the reader. This clones the last keycard used on this lock. After several tense seconds, the lock clicked open. Reed pushed the door slowly, ready to react if an alarm sounded. None did. The room was dimly lit by a small lamp near the bed, and there, lying motionless beneath a thin blanket, was Catherine Whitley. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, and an IV line ran from her arm to a medication pump beside the bed. Elizabeth rushed to her sister's side, taking her hand gently. Catherine? Catherine, it's me. It's Elizabeth. Catherine's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Liz. Her voice was a bare whisper, slurred from medication. How? We're getting you out of here, Elizabeth said firmly, looking to Reed. Can we disconnect this? Reed examined the IV and pump carefully. We need to do it properly, or it could harm her. Let me check what they're giving her. As Reed inspected the medication, Catherine's grip on Elizabeth's hand tightened slightly. The evidence, she managed to say. Did you find it? The memory card in your locket? Elizabeth confirmed. Yes, I have it. Amy gave it to me. A flicker of relief crossed Catherine's face. Julian, he helped me. They found out. I know, Elizabeth said gently. Julian was trying to help you expose the Roxbury fraud. Catherine's eyes widened with sudden urgency. Not just Roxbury, bigger, much bigger, systemic. Across all projects, Father knew people died in Chicago. Reed returned to the bedside, his expression grave. They've got her on a heavy sedative cocktail. We need to remove the IV properly, then wait at least 20 minutes before moving her. Her system needs time to start clearing the drugs. We might not have 20 minutes, Elizabeth replied, glancing nervously at the door. If we move her while she's this heavily sedated, she could have respiratory depression, even cardiac issues, Reed countered. I've seen it happen with overdose victims. Catherine's eyes had closed again, her brief moment of lucidity fading. Elizabeth stroked her sister's hair, fighting back tears of anger and relief. Stay with us, Kath. We're taking you home. Reed carefully removed the IV, applying pressure to the insertion site and then a small bandage. Now we wait, he said, checking his watch. If anyone comes to check on her, we'll have to improvise. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Elizabeth kept watch at the door, while Reed monitored Catherine's vital signs, periodically checking her pulse and responsiveness. After 15 minutes, Catherine began to show signs of increased awareness, her eyes more focused when open, her speech less slurred. We should go, Reed said finally. She's still going to be unsteady, but waiting longer increases our risk of discovery. Together, they helped Catherine sit up, then stand, supporting her weight between them. She was dressed in hospital-issued pajamas, her feet bare on the cold floor. My shoes, she asked, her voice stronger now. No time, Reed replied. I'll carry you once we're outside. Their progress was painfully slow, with Catherine stumbling despite their support. At the secure wing entrance they paused, listening for any sign of staff. The corridor beyond seemed empty. Remember the path, Reed whispered. Service elevator to the first floor, then straight to the delivery entrance. If we get separated, head for the trees behind the building. I parked a quarter-mile east. They had just reached the elevator when an alarm began to sound. Not from Catherine's room, but from somewhere else in the facility. Lights flashed in the corridor, and doors began to open as staff responded to the emergency. "Now what?" Elizabeth asked, heart pounding. Reed made a split-second decision. "Change of plan. We go out the front." In the confusion, we're just staff helping a patient during an emergency evacuation. The lobby was already filling with disoriented patients and hurried staff when they emerged from a side corridor. Reed guided them toward the main entrance with confident purpose, nodding professionally to a security guard who was directing traffic. "Fire alarm in the east wing," the guard called over the noise. "Everyone to the designated assembly point." Outside, the night air was crisp with approaching dawn. Emergency vehicles were already arriving, their lights casting red and blue patterns across the facility grounds. Reed steered them away from the gathering crowds, moving toward the tree line with deliberate casualness. "Almost there," he encouraged Catherine, who was growing stronger with each step, the effects of the sedatives gradually wearing off. They had reached the edge of the wooded area when a voice called out behind them, "Stop right there! Security!" Reed turned, positioning himself between the women and the approaching guard. "Sir, I'm Detective Marcus Reed, Boston Police," he said with calm authority. "I'm executing an emergency transfer of a witness in an ongoing investigation." The guard hesitated, clearly not expecting such a response. "I need to see some identification and transfer papers." "Of course," Reed replied, slowly reaching into his jacket. Instead of ID, he produced his service weapon, not raising it, but ensuring it was visible. "Sir, I don't want any trouble. This woman was being held against her will as part of a criminal conspiracy. I'm asking you to let us leave peacefully." The guard assessed the situation, his gaze moving from Reed's steady hand to Catherine's pale face and hospital clothes. After a moment, he stepped back. "I never saw you," he said quietly. "But you got about 2 minutes before the supervisor does a head count. Make it count." They moved quickly through the woods, Reed supporting Catherine, while Elizabeth navigated using the flashlight on her phone. The car was where they had left it, hidden by a stand of pines off a maintenance road. As they drove away, Catherine leaned against her sister in the back seat, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "How did you find me?" she asked softly. "The same way you found the truth about Father's projects," Elizabeth replied, "by asking questions no one wanted answered." Reed caught Elizabeth's eye in the rearview mirror. "We're not out of the woods yet. Once they realize Catherine is gone, they'll alert local authorities. We need to get across state lines before they can set up roadblocks." "Then where?" Elizabeth asked. "We can't go home, not with Father and Morrow still controlling everything." "I have a cabin in the White Mountains," Reed said. "Off-grid, hard to find if you don't know where to look. We can regroup there, review whatever evidence is on that memory card, and figure out our next move." Catherine straightened slightly, a spark of her former determination visible through her exhaustion. "The evidence on that card doesn't just implicate Father in fraud. It connects him to at least 3 deaths in Chicago when a similar housing project collapsed during construction. Workers who died because of cut corners, substandard materials, and ignored safety warnings. Criminal negligence at minimum," Reed said grimly. "Potentially manslaughter charges." "And Julian?" Elizabeth asked, dreading the answer. "Is he—" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. We were separated when they took us. He was supposed to meet me at Clearwater, had a plan to get us both out, but he never showed up." Neither Reed nor Elizabeth had the heart to tell her about the body found in the Charles River. That news would have to wait until Catherine was stronger. As they crossed into New Hampshire, the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Catherine had fallen into an exhausted sleep against Elizabeth's shoulder, her breathing finally deep and regular. In the front seat, Reed made a series of calls, first to Sanchez, updating him on their location and Catherine's condition, then to a trusted assistant district attorney, laying the groundwork for what would become the most significant corruption case in Massachusetts history. Elizabeth gazed out the window at the passing landscape, still processing everything that had happened. In the span of a week, her carefully constructed world had shattered, revealing ugly truths about her father, her family legacy, and the system she had trusted. Yet amid that destruction, she had found something unexpected, her own voice, her own strength. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, careful not to wake her sister. Reed glanced back at her, his expression a mixture of determination and weariness. "Now we build a case that even your father's influence can't bury. It won't be easy. People like Senator Whitley don't go down without a fight." "He'll use everything he has," Elizabeth agreed. "Money, connections, the media. He'll try to paint Catherine as unstable, me as misguided, you as overzealous." "Probably," Reed nodded. "But we have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "The truth," Reed said simply, "and enough people brave enough to tell it." As the sun rose fully over the mountains, casting long shadows across the winding road ahead, Elizabeth realized that this was just the beginning of a much longer journey. The evidence they had gathered would eventually lead to one of the most publicized corruption trials in recent memory, exposing systemic fraud and criminal negligence that reached far beyond the Whitley Foundation. The media would descend, dissecting every detail, turning their lives into primetime specials and front-page headlines. Years later, when a production company approached them about adapting the story into a television series, Catherine would hesitate, wary of reliving those dark days. But Elizabeth would recognize the opportunity for what it was, a chance to tell the story their way, to ensure that the truth would outlive the headlines and sound bites. The Real Case, that became a hit series, would go on to win critical acclaim and multiple awards, not for its dramatic embellishments, but for its unflinching portrayal of corruption, courage, and the power of unwavering determination. For now, though, in the quiet of the car with her sister safely beside her, Elizabeth allowed herself a moment of simple gratitude. They had found Catherine. Against all odds, they had brought her home. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, no longer silenced, no longer afraid.